And back with Suzanne Clothier, you were talking about exploring the relationship between us and our canine companions. And something you said struck me right now in the training world is particularly volatile. It always has been between those that sort of espouse to what we call more old style punitive compulsion theories, such as, the dog is alpha, and to those that maybe follow more science-based, more sort of progressive methods, for want of a better word. And interestingly enough, this weekend I was at a friend's 50th birthday party, and we were in the middle of Texas. And I was speaking to a woman that I'd met, and she was another guest at this party, and around my age and from Atlanta. And she was telling us, wanted to show, because you know this as a dog trainer, when you go out anyway and anyone knows, finds out you're a dog trainer or knows your work, they want to show you pictures of their dogs. So she, and I love it. I mean, we talk dogs all day. I don't care. So show me photographs. And I will go goo goo gaga more than I do with kids. I will. I mean, I love kids too, but I will just go, yeah, that dog's just gorgeous, because it's the way they look in the camera and it's those beautiful eyes, and it just gets me every time. But she was saying, yeah, we've had real problems with this dog, and he was a hound, and he is a hound, and actually he had bitten a couple of times, especially he'd bitten the husband. But we went to a great trainer, and we've learned now that we need to be alpha, and that his behavior was him being dominant over us and him wanting to get, the highest status in the pack. And but now the training that we're doing with him has really helped him see that he's not, and that he is very much, knows his place. And so I said, interesting, how did that, what sort of work did you do? And it was a combination of, some what I would call positive reinforcement, but obviously there was all that sort of sword of Damocles, I call it. I call the shock collars the sword of Damocles, really, that's always hanging over your head. So, you better behave. And so we just started to have a conversation, and my younger self might have got sweaty again and hot under the collar, and kind of like my adrenaline would have gone up, but because I think my younger self would have been sort of less instructional and a bit more, not attacking, I never did that, but a bit more angry at what she said. But actually we started on this really lovely explorative conversation about why. And so I said, well, let's explore this whole alpha. And it was we had a long dinner. So, everybody was getting drunk, and we were the two people that weren't. So we just started to have this really great conversation. And she was astonished that actually, potentially, this might not be the kind of, or the way that all dogs were trained. She was stunned by it. And so, and I always say, regardless of how you do it, or what you think, or what side of this huge divide you're on, we just all need to shut up and look at the dog. Look at the dog. Really, truly observe the dog. What do you say to that? And what would you say to somebody who says, yeah, it's great, my dog doesn't bite at all now, and now I'm the alpha? What would you say to that person?
So many, many years ago, when I spoke at APDT, I don't remember which one, just before I went up on the stage, this little reporter, she just dashes up and she's like, if you had just one sentence to say to young trainers, what would it be? I thought, right now, like, seriously. I was like, all right. Sit here. These are the 3 words that will serve you well anywhere. Whoever you are as a trainer, see the dog. That's it. See the dog. So encapsulated in that is a world that we can unpack. We could talk for hours about that. What does that mean? In fact, that's the the presentation I did for you is just a hint of the iceberg of the ways that I do see the dog and help others see the dog. But it includes, number one, that we're going to be willing to see the dog, like to set aside our preconceived notions and our assumptions and our biases and just see what's happening, pure and simple. Like, do we have the observation skills? We might see what we see. So in the case of the hound that's biting, they do see the hound that's biting, and that's scary. And no one likes to be bit. No one likes to be bit. I've met a couple of trainers over the years that, like, I have to take the bite so I know what kind of dog it is. And I thought, right, okay, you're just mad. We just walk away from those people. They proudly show you the scars too. Very strange. So that's a rare subset of wacko. But see the dog means that we actually have the skills to see. So one of the things that's missing in this big divide conversation, I will say there's always been, from the late 80s, early 90s, right? The advent of Dunbar. And before that, there were people that were moving towards more motivational methods, less correction. There's a spectrum. This is not a giant divide where the temple veil split in half one fine day. It didn't. But in the old days, if you didn't like a trainer, you didn't go to their seminar. If you didn't like the club, you didn't join it. You didn't go home and get on your computer and snipe away and send nasty messages anonymously or get into these vitriolic wars on social media. So you're like, oh, I just don't go to that club, or I'm not going to show there because I don't like the way they train. Period. It's done. Like, it's not having this chat. So what we see informs what we do. What we see informs what we understand. And so one of the things I learned early on, I remember being called in by a training club whose methodology I did not particularly like. I would not recommend them. I had many of their dropouts. They were highly punitive, a lot of correction based, a lot of really over the top, scaring dogs, shutting them down. So a lot of their ex-students found their way to me. But they did care enough that when they had a really troublesome club member's dog, they asked me to come in and do a consultation. It was a little Boston Terrier. And two of the club members were convinced that he was a giant liability. He was just, a disaster waiting to happen. I thought, well, number one, it's a Boston. It's not a Bouvier. It's a Boston. Okay, if I can pick it up and hold it at arm's length, we have some limit on the damage it can do, but fair enough. And so this little dog, you could see he was, what I saw, while they presented him as vicious, he bites with no warning, he's bitten his owner, he's tried to bite the instructors, blah, blah, blah. That was their picture. And you have to have respect for what they see, because that is their perspective. And we lose the chance to be informed and to inform, if that's an opportunity, when we don't even respect how someone else is perceiving something. So their perception was that. And I thought, right. So now my next step is I can see the person. Let's start with that, right? I see them. I hear what they're saying. I see their concerns. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I accept that that's their perspective. It's just like looking out one window. You look out one window, I look out another. I'm like, look at that cow. And you're like, I don't see any cows at all, because we're having different perspectives. So then I asked the dog, all right, tell me, let me see you. What do you have to say about this situation? What the dog said was, this is overwhelming for me. I don't feel safe here. In fact, I'm going to park myself, because I am a Boston, I can do this. I'm going to park myself between my owner's ankles. That is the safest place I can find. I watched him come into the building and he was just head on a swivel, just, oh Lord, which direction are the attacking troops coming from? And so when she stopped in the middle of this great big room, there's 3 classes going at once, and his little ears are swiveling and his eyes are darting, and he just parked himself right between her ankles. And that was as small and safe as place as he could get. So I was like, all right, you don't feel safe. This is really anxiety producing for you. It's got your arousal way up. You don't feel safe. You're trying to protect yourself. He tried to get her to pick him up, actually. He climbed up her leg, like, please, hello, hello, hello. And she's like, stop that, stop that. So he's like, all right, if I just tuck between her ankles, maybe I can, have a prayer of staying safe. At which point the instructor goes over and she reaches for him to touch him on the head. And you see his eyes get wide and he stopped breathing and his lips compressed. Nothing happens. From the instructor's point of view, nothing happens. And I remember thinking like, right, okay, I see what's going on. And she does it again. And this time she's patting him on the head further. So now I see his little whisker bed start to rumple up. And you see him, his eyes get hard, like, you should stop doing that. Like, please don't touch me. She takes her hand away, and I thought, okay, she saw that. She does it again, and now he begins to growl, and I see his whole body stiffen up. Takes her hand away, and then she does it one more time, and this time he snaps. He doesn't connect. If he wanted to, he would have been hanging off her hand, but big growl, And she goes, you see what I mean? Just out of the clear blue sky. You see what I mean? And I thought, I do. I see the problem. The problem here is that what you see and understand is not what he believes you see and understand. So he was immensely fair. He escalated appropriately. He gave her all the warnings that another dog-savvy dog would have recognized, or a more observant trainer would have recognized. And I realized her skill level at reading dog body language was, if they're not actually snarling or showing you their teeth or growling loud, they're fine. It's like, well, all right then. I call that the coal miner bowling alley moment, where if you go to the bowling alley in coal mining country and you look at the coal miners and they're drinking beer and bowling and having fun with their friends, and you look around and you're like, what's all this talk about coal mining being bad for your lungs? Look at them. They're having fun. They're fine. It's a very superficial look. And it's an unfair look. And so how can I help people see more deeply? It's like, okay, so he did not actually do that. And nowadays we have video. So now video helps us say, let's watch this in slow motion. In the old days, and back in the old days when I was still a whippersnapper, Victoria, we didn't have video. So I had to educate people's eyes, not by provoking the dog over and over again, but by steering their observations in ways. And I said, okay, so take just a step towards him. What I want you to watch his breathing. And as you step towards him, she was still probably 6 feet away. Watch what changes with his breathing. Now step back. Oh, that means something. It's like, yes. So save that little guy because the owner was devastated to think she had an aggressive dog. She didn't. She had a fearful dog who was overwhelmed. The club didn't have to kick a long-term member out. The instructors didn't get bit. And it's like, let's set this up. Let's bring him in this way. Give him this spot over here. When it's time to exit, let him go out that door. Bring your classes. In fact, I changed how their flow came because it was like, cross purposes as classes switched. It was a tide of exhausted, tired dogs going out and a tide of completely crazy, woo, dogs coming in. It's like you actually have multiple exits. Let's make that an exit and that an entrance. And we could eliminate most of the arguments. So whenever people say like, you see that, but they don't, it's like, well, that's my job. My job is to say, what do you say, person? And I believe them. I don't necessarily agree with them. And often I can tell where likelihood is they've misinterpreted or missed signals, like with this little Boston. And then I ask the dog, tell me your side of the story. What do you have to say about this? If they line up, then it's a matter of, all right, That's what we've got going on here. Now let me help both of you find a new way to resolve this so it's comfortable for both of you. And person, just have to say, you may have to give a lot more than we can ask the dog to, because he didn't choose this. You did. But if I have a big discrepancy between the dog's perspective and the handler's perspective, now, like your dinner guest friend there, we have some territory to cover where I have to say, there's a different way to look at that. Have you ever, and I really love drawing parallels from their own experience, because we know so much about being treated in certain ways. We know whether or not we've been respected. I have a friend who was a psychiatric social worker in maximum security prisons. And I asked him, have you ever dealt with someone who was so deranged that they didn't understand relationship? He said, what's really interesting is, he said, there are some that don't respect other people, but all of them knew when they were being respected and when they were actually being listened to, every one of them. And I thought that was really, really interesting. So the goal would be, can I show you a different way? And so that parallel of, do you know what it feels like to have someone misunderstand something that you said? Or, did you ever, I usually try to find out something about them, and try to draw parallels from their own life. Most of us are thousands and thousands of human relationships old. Many of us, there's a little book that I published. I didn't write it, but it's called Separate Lifetimes. And in that, one of the chapters, he's talking to a cat. And he's like, hey, I realize I've known lots and lots of horses and cattle and dogs, and you are only the fifth cat in my life. I'm only 5 cats old. So I began asking people that, how many dogs old are you? And sometimes they would say, I'm 4 dogs old. It's like, I'm many dogs old. I'm Methuselah, not quite, but many dogs old. And it just means we've had more practice with relationships. I mean, how could you and I even have this kind of conversation if I was only the 5th person you'd ever really talk to? It would be a very clumsy, by the time most of us get to kindergarten, we've had, hundreds of relationships if we've been well socialized. Some more casual than others, but yeah, so that's always in the back of my mind. How many dogs old is this person? Sometimes I ask them outright, just out of curiosity, and sometimes I just let it become obvious. But I also respect, the same way I would with a puppy or a young dog or an unschooled horse. You don't know. Instead of, you are willfully plowing this particular philosophy and you intend to hurt, scare, alarm, cause pain to an animal. I don't find that's true. And I think this is so badly missing in this conversation, where people are like, well, she used a shock collar. It's like, I know how to use a shock collar. The ironic part is, one of the reasons people are like, wow, like you could be a professional, was because in the horse world, I was so good at delivering a correction that the horse was like, got it, I shouldn't do that again. It's like, no. And he's like, oh, okay. And we carry on. They weren't afraid of me. They still trusted me because I was fair. I just choose not to use corrections like that anymore, but I know how.
Yeah. And I like the fact that you're saying that, and that makes me think of Steve White's, is it 8 rules of punishment? Where, sure, if you're going to deliver punishment, make sure you do it correctly. And here are the 8 ways that you deliver a punishment correctly. And then when you go through the 8 ways, you go, oh, well, I have to deliver it every time the behavior occurs. How am I going to do that when I am not there? My punishment has to be done within a millisecond of the behavior, whatever he says. I'm just paraphrasing. But what happens if I'm too slow and actually I'm punishing the wrong thing? So actually, when you see how many mistakes you can make delivering the punishment, you can see how much damage you can do when you deliver that punishment incorrectly. And so, and also the other thing, and I do want to talk about breeds, because you have German Shepherds. I think you said you have 7 German Shepherds right now. And most people think of us, and I'm just going to do like this with my air quotes, positive trainers. I really don't like that term. But maybe more forward thinking. I don't even like that term either. But many people think that, well, Suzanne, that's fine that you're looking at that sweet little Boston Terrier, but I'm dealing with some big, powerful dogs, and that stuff does not work with them. And I have worked with working dogs, and especially when I was filming with the police for 5 years and started working with them and training with them and going out on calls with them and seeing how these dogs not only responded during training, but also whilst they're actually doing the job, I feel now that I have plenty of experience in talking about how, and all the dogs that I've worked with, that in fact the methods that we like to use actually really do work on these larger, more powerful, again, air quotes, red zone dogs, if they're showing particularly difficult behavior. But you own German Shepherds. You've lived with German Shepherds for years and years and years. Does it work on these big, powerful dogs?
Of course. I'm on generation number 11, so I've been breeding Shepherds for a very long time. Past that, we have Scottish Highland cattle. And Scottish Highland cattle are they're a really interesting breed because they're wicked smart. They're wicked, wicked smart. We also have pigs. We have Gloucestershire Old Spots. And these are not animals that we don't raise them. We've had some bottle babies, of course, over the years. But by and large, they're busy out there living their lives. They're not handled much. And yet we are able to move them, ask them to come here or there. And believe me, these are fast, strong, savvy cattle that are quite athletic. Without laying a glove on them, without putting a halter on them, without having to physically control them, we can gain cooperation from them. Ditto for pigs. If you've ever handled pigs, there are no handles on a pig. Let's just start with that. There's just nothing to hang on to. Yep. And also, as they say, you can fool a pig once. You will never fool a pig with that same technique again, right? So you have to be very honest with pigs. And turns out the Highlands are the same way. And ditto for the horses in my life. I have not required a lot of equipment. They can do a lot of damage. They're big and they're strong and they're fast and they have small brains. Good ones, but interesting and small. As soon as someone tells me how big and strong or intense an animal is, then I know there's an element of fear there. And quite often for good damn cause, right? I do not ever lightly interact with a bull or a 1,600-pound horse or whatever. I remember years ago I had an Olympic dressage rider as one of my students, and I had ridden under her in a couple of lessons and watched her with her own horses. And she brought her dog to my classes. And I remember thinking, like, stop that. Like, stop that. Like, do not do that to your dog again. Because, well, he wasn't paying attention. I said, look, if anyone walked into your barn and did to one of your 1,400-pound warm bloods what you just did to that dog, would that be acceptable? She said, I would fire them on the spot. I said, why are you doing it to a 70-pound dog who has a far better brain than any of your warm bloods? I said, do that again and I'll kick you out. She says, you're joking. I said, I'm not joking. Work with his mind. Work with his mind. So there's a tendency, and again, we're back to really see the human, right? So as soon as they say, you don't understand, then I know that you have some limits and that you may be trying to work with these, I'll borrow that term, though I don't like it. People understand it, the red zone dogs.
Yeah, I don't like it either.
It's like, so what you're describing is an animal who is so non-productively aroused that he can't even think straight. And so if that was a human, we would be also alarmed. And if we gave him a gun, we'd be extremely alarmed. He's not in his right mind, and he's got a gun. So when we look at a dog who's got 42 big teeth and has been selectively bred and selected for his willingness to make hard physical contact and is not easily dissuaded and is easily triggered, we have a problem. So there was a club in Belgium, and after seeing my seminar, they said, well, will you come to the club and just work with a couple of the dogs? And I said, sure, it's a Schutzen club. And they get this dog out of the car, and before they even get him out of the van, you can hear the screaming. He's just hysterical. They get him out of the van. You know the scene, right? He comes out. He's on his hind legs. He's being held on a prong collar, and he's just, it's the, canine version of the black stallion losing his mind. Although I don't think the black ever used his mind. Those of us who read Walter Farley knows the black never lost his mind. That's what made him special. But this dog comes out. He's on his hind legs screaming the whole way to the training field. And it's just correction after correction, which just amps him up further. And so by the time they get to the field, they're like, all right, shall we show you what the problem is? I said, I have seen what the problem is. And they're like, you have? But we haven't even asked him to heel yet. I was like, no, because you're going to take him and put him back in the car. And then when he's able to come out of the crate with one quiet down and is able to land and sit and then walk over here under some control and is responsive to you and you've got brakes, can you stop? And he stops. If you were just backing your car out of the driveway and as you put your foot on the brakes, it just kept sailing into the road, no one would say, oh, well, I bet when I get on the highway, it's going to be fine once I get to 70 miles an hour. We don't. We're like, uh-oh, we don't have brakes. And yet horse and dog people do it all the time. The animal's like, yeah, you know what? Don't have any brakes. In fact, I don't have any steering. And we're like, how dare you? Instead of saying, whoa, this is not the state of mind where any of us are going to be safe or learn. So I said, go get this dog and let's start at the van. Let's start at the moment where the interaction occurs. Now, but of course he blows himself out in a couple of minutes. He's exhausted. So what we call red zone dogs is just arousal with no brakes, no steering. And that is not drive. And as you know, having watched police work now, a lot of the dogs they choose as high drive, they're frightening because they actually don't have good brakes and steering. And they are dangerous.
Do not. I think that was a huge eye-opener to me, was that I did not feel safe around many of these dogs.
They're not safe.
And they're not. Wrong. And there's a reason for it, right? I remember Patricia McConnell always saying, if the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, listen.
Believe them. Yes.
Believe them and listen, because that is trying to keep you safe. In your talk, you are going to be speaking at the conference April 21st to 23rd, everybody. So register now to hear Suzanne speak, because wow, you're gonna learn a lot. But you start off with a quote. And I want to end this podcast with this quote. Looking and seeing are as different as babbling and speaking. Most people only look and do not see. That is Larry Bates, The Visual Experience. Why did you choose this quote to start off your presentation?
I think because it is almost an art form. So in other little portions of my life, for a brief period, I earned my living as an artist doing animal portraits and teaching animal artwork. And I think one of the greatest aspects that I bring from that part of my life is the teachers who taught me how to see. You think you're looking. No, really learn to see. And that is it's a lifetime of practice. It's a whole nother way. It's like, oh yeah, I see that dog. It's like, no, see the dog. Don't just look at him. See the dog. And not, because it changes everything. So one, there has to be the willingness to be curious enough to really, really see without preconceived notions. It's like, oh, he's fine. It's like, I hate that sentence more than I hate most sentences on the planet. He's fine. It's like, how do you define fine? Like, yeah, not the way I define fine. And so I think it's a practice. I think it's almost, for me, really seeing an animal is a meditation on that animal. It confers that there is a need to go deeper, that we're very superficial in this society. It's like, as they say, if your website hasn't loaded up in 22 seconds, they're like, I'm going someplace else. It's like, I'm fine with that, since if you have that attention span, my work will probably be a little too much for you. I'm quite sure about that. But it's not encouraged. Like, just sit. We had a exercise we would do here at the farm with trainers. I would give them an hour and say, go pick any animal on the farm that you like. Anything from our tortoises to, the horses, the donkeys, the cows, the pigs, whatever you want, the cats, the barn cats, the chickens. I don't care. Go watch something for an hour. Like, really, really look at it. And one woman was just outraged. She's muttering, like, this is probably just so you don't have to teach for an hour. And I thought, yes, that's why I put lots of people on my farm and interrupt my life so I can just get out of it. I thought, all right, you're very angry about this, and you're afraid because I think you don't actually think you're going to get it right, And so I saw her, and she watched the pigs for a while, and then she's like, and she went and watched the cow for a while, and she watched the horse, and you could just see her like, well, this is stupid. And this is stupid. She spent the entire hour practically doing that. The last thing I see is she's sitting down at the edge of the barn, and she's just sitting there. And I thought, right, I can only offer the exercise. You have to want to participate. And to my surprise, when I called everybody in, she didn't respond. And I was like, hey, hello, we're going to gather and talk about what we observed, what we saw with these animals. And she says, oh, that was amazing. And I thought, really? Because it didn't look like that was the experience you're having, but, it would be like watching someone at a dinner party, taking a bite, spitting it out, taking a bite, spitting it out, and then saying, this was a lovely dinner. It's like, was it? Because I didn't see you actually eat anything, but all right. And she says, well, frankly, I was very, very upset, and I was worried I wasn't going to get it right. And I thought, that's what I thought was there, was the fear. And she said, and then I just sat down. I thought, right, there's 15 minutes left. I'm just going to sit here and pretend I'm looking at something. And then a fly landed on her knee, and she started to flick it away. And then she's like, fine, I'll just watch a fly. She goes, do you know that they clean their faces with their little front legs? Do you know that you can see right through their legs? Did you know they have like these amazing eyes, and the color? And there's like little teeny tiny, like they have little joints. And she spent 15 minutes watching a fly. I was like, God bless you, Mr. Fly, who sat there and educated her. Wow. I thought, right. And it just cracked something open in her. The act of setting aside your preconceived notions, setting aside everything except respect and curiosity. Show me who you are. Let me see. I may not understand what I'm seeing, but it's the beginning of understanding when we actually open our hearts and our minds to see another being for who they are.
You speak such wonderful sense. I'm very, very excited for our attendees to hear you speak at the Dog Behavior Conference. And for those of you who want to hear more of Suzanne, please, you can register at the conference, dogbehaviorconference.com. Go to her website, SuzanneClothier.com. She's going to change your world. Suzanne, thank you so much